Without further ado, let me have the privilege to introduce Dr. Albert Arisman. His credential and the richness of experience doesn't do justice with my 5 seconds introduction. Dr. Arisman have 32 years working as a director of technology, directing 300 plus researcher in the Boeing company. And since he retired in 2001, he's been teaching in the Seattle Pacific University at the business school there. And then recently he's been a board member in Service Master, and he has a book called The Service Master Story. And that's just the highlight, some of the highlight. And without further ado, I will pass the time to Al, and looking forward to your inspiring talk.
Thank you, Joanna, and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, since March, we've been dealing with a global pandemic, and the challenge to our way of life remains high. We've learned a great deal about the virus and its spread, its destruction, and the impact on health, economics, mental health, and way of life. I think it's time to do a reset as we think about public policy. My proposal here comes from 3 parts of my background that may seem unrelated. First, I'm a follower of Jesus. Second, I'm a research mathematician. Third, I had many years engaged in airplane design. I'm going to bring these concepts together in my proposal. And as you listen, it's my hope that you will connect with someone in public policy at the local, state, or federal level, and let's see if together we can create some change. I'd like to share some slides with you now so that you can see this story. And I'd also like to thank my good colleague and friend, Scott Griffin, from the Boeing Company, who was helpful to me in putting this together. So let's start by assessing where we are. I think about the work of Dr. Fauci and the team at the National Institutes of Health and all of the hard work that's gone into understanding this virus. And I applaud the good scientific work that they have done. I think that we need to be very respectful of that good work, recognizing the nature of science and how it changes. However, the people that are doing this work are addressing only one part of the problem, because we know that there is a huge impact coming from mental health areas. Forecasts of many suicides per day coming out of this pandemic. And then, of course, we deal with the unemployment issue. Unemployment has affected so many people who are out of jobs, who are in despair, who lack access to the basics. So how should we think about this, accounting for all of this? Let me start with my Christian perspective and say, one of the things I've been taught is that we should look not only to our own interests, but also the interests of others. How do we think about those people who are at health risk and at the same time at economic risk and mental health risk? How do we recognize all people as image bearers of God? So that's a start. Secondly, though, as a mathematician, let me think about this mathematically. So I've drawn a notional picture here that the more we open up society, the more deaths we could expect based on our understanding of the spread of infectious disease. And the curve might look something like this, okay? And if we have a curve that looks like that, we want fewer deaths, and so we should lock down as much as possible. However, we know we can't lock completely down because we couldn't get health emergency services, we couldn't get food, and so we're going to have to set a policy that isn't quite locked down, but as close as possible. However, if we think about those other things I was talking about, the impact of mental health, the impact of economics, we get a different curve. And the more we lock down, the more problems we're going to have. And that curve might look something like this, where as we open up more, We allow more freedom, more flexibility, improvements in mental health, improvements of economics. However, as the virus takes over, we would expect that to deteriorate in terms of quality of life. And so, as a mathematician, I would put these two curves together and say the composite looks something like this. And this would suggest if we want to open up as much as we can to create better opportunity, the policy might look like this. Now, this is a notional concept, and we all know that this is not a linear function, and the more we open up, we can just add one thing, then another, then another. How do we open up more and still account for all that we know? For that, I need to turn to airplane design. So let me draw a few pictures for you. Let's start by thinking about what an airplane, a very complex object, which we used to be on a lot, and I have stopped being on such things since the 1st of March. When you go to design an airplane, one of the very first things you think about is safety. And so we have structural engineers engaged in making sure that this airplane will hold together in turbulence, will endure many, many takeoffs and landings. And from a structural engineering point of view, an airplane looks something like this. Now you look at that and you say, okay, that looks safe, but I'm not sure it could get off the ground. So then you bring in an aerodynamics point of view and you say, well, how should an airplane be sleek and cut through the air in a very efficient way? And an airplane might look something like this. But along comes an airline who looks at these two opportunities and they say, no, that won't work because we need to carry passengers and freight. Actually, an airplane needs to look something like this. But of course, you need the propulsion to get this airplane off the ground. And so the propulsion people think it looks like this. And finally, an airplane has so much electronics to govern everything that goes on in the airplane. And from an electrical engineering point of view, an airplane looks kind of like this. How do you bring those together? Because that's ultimately the goal of airplane design. You can't discard any one of these, but here are some steps that we learn to go through. First of all, create a common objective. Secondly, create a cross-disciplinary team of all those that are involved. I mentioned just a few. There are more than that. Thirdly, have people that are detailed experts in each of the fields, but who are willing to engage in a process of working with each other. And this process of resolving and arbitrating conflicts in order to create this final design is a very technical problem. You could not think of the idea of a structural engineer and an aerodynamics engineer handing the boss their best efforts and say, figure it out. But in the end, once you get the airplane, you then have to make sure that you can make it, because some of the things might introduce too much complexity, and so you back off a little bit. And this is the general process for getting it done. Now, how does that compare with COVID? Let's talk about a goal, first of all. We want as flourishing a society as possible within the constraints and realities of the pandemic. We need to recognize that safety first, as we did with airplanes. And so let's talk about how the disease spreads and what we need to be thinking about with respect to that. But let's not stop there. Let's ask the question, well, what about economic stability? And how will that affect our final design of policy? And then we need to ask, well, what about mental health issues and behavior issues and all of those things? But of course, we all recognize that this has led to an incredible amount of social tension, some racial unrest due to unrelated but related incidents that have happened. And in order to create a policy, we need to come together around these things. And I'm thinking that maybe the process looks something like airplane design. In fact, to accomplish policy would require the same 4 steps we had before. Let's step back and say, what is our common objective? It's more than stopping the spread of the disease, although it includes that. let's bring a cross-disciplinary team together that really each person understands each area in detail. And then let's resolve and arbitrate conflicts as we develop policy. And in the end, let's create something that's understandable. And it does mean we need to be careful with language. Some of our language has been too hurried, I believe, and so we talk about essential workers. Are you told that if you don't fit a certain class, you're not essential? We're told about social distancing. We are human beings made to communicate and be social. Physical distancing with intentional socialization is really what we're after. So be very careful with our language. As we approach this day, we recognize that we're caught between two worlds. On the one hand, we have this infectious disease issue. On the other hand, we have long unemployment lines and other things that affect the way our world is shaped. And we need to think about this differently. So what are the next steps? I think we need to bring together experts in each area. I've set out to meet with some modeling people, and I said, how much time do you spend with policymakers or with economic people or with mental health people? And they say, no, we focus on our area. We need to have respected ones that are really good in each area, but who respect expertise in other areas. Then we need a common and clear goal. And finally, we need a strong, focused leader of this team that will create an environment where there is no fear, where anyone can raise any question they want as you seek together to get to this common objective. The sketch that I've given you provides a big picture, but the details matter. My goal in this talk was to get a conversation started to seek a better path through this very challenging time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Erisman. It's an honor to have you with us, and just hearing about how we're trying to build bridges gives us a lot of heart for the kind of conversation that we can hope for from you and from others in this field right now. And so our first question is, we're receiving the question about how people can work together cross-functionally to be able to continue the goals that you have, because it looks like, you know, we can't do this on our own. There's a lot of people that aren't at the table. Who are some people that you want to see front and center in the conversation?
I would certainly like, in this case of designing policy, to have the best of the infectious disease people, but also the best of the economists, small business owners, mental health people, people involved in trying to sort through the social and racial unrest that we are dealing with. And they all need a voice in creating a policy, and they need to do some detailed trade-offs. We're not very well trained to do cross-disciplinary work, are we? And I think it's absolutely essential to address a big problem in this way.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. And I'll just say, if anyone on the panel of speakers has a question for Dr. Erisman, feel free to chime in as well. That's totally a great opportunity. Our second question, though, in the meantime, is who would you want to see this recording? You have taken the time, you've taken your space of mind to share with us. What is your objective personally moving forward, and who do you hope watches this?
So I would love to see governors, mayors, people that are setting policy at the local, at the state, even at the federal level, to start asking the question, is there a better approach to policy? But the reason I did it here is that I believe that by having a diverse set of people aware of this, maybe you have contacts I don't have. Maybe you know someone that I don't know. Let's start a conversation and let's figure out how to do this because I absolutely think it's vital going forward.
It's great. Some questions from our panel. How can you manage cultural specifics per country when addressing a global problem with a cross-functional team? Is there a good place to start? I mean, that's a hefty question. Like
I
cultural.
get the question.
Yeah.
I think the issue is you start as small as you can, because if you say you started in a city, say some city was doing things differently, sure, it's affected by global impact, but it starts to be a model and a demonstration that things somehow look different here. What happened? And then maybe you do it, maybe a state, or maybe a region or a county or something, some ways of actually demonstrating little bits of progress. You know, when I was at Boeing and we did research and we wanted the results of this research to have an impact on the company, how do you have an impact on the whole company? And the answer is one corner at a time. And as someone has success, they spread it to someone else, and it makes a difference.
That's good. I totally agree. I think, you know, when we're relational in the sense of we communicate to the people right in front of us that we're connected to, it really has the opportunity to make an impact because we're going to see those people, interact with them again, hopefully. But in the spirit of that, we're grateful that you take your time with us. Somebody put a question in about how they're grateful just to see you speak from your background on this topic because they're afraid the church doesn't take scientists and doesn't take policymakers seriously enough in this time. And so they're curious, how can we change that in churches? Have you seen any models? Have you seen pastors bring in people or folks work together across the table effectively beyond the professional setting in your company, but just, you know, out there in the wild?
One of the reasons I've been on the Theology of Work project for a long time is to try and look deeply at the scripture and ask, what do they say about daily work? And then get that spread to churches so that pastors can equip people in the marketplace to be the church wherever God has placed them. So that's really an important aspect of it. And I guess the second thing behind what your question is, what's an old guy like me doing at a young people's conference like this? And I guess the point is that I have a deep passion for this stuff, and I will share it wherever I can. This is something that I strongly believe in about our work, science, making a difference, being the church, living an integrated life. This is a part of who I am, and I'll share it whenever I can.
Awesome.